The Aston Martin DB11 V8. I mean, it just sounds like a great GT car before you even begin to think about what it might be like to drive. But when you do, things get even better still. This particular DB11 has a twin-turbo V8 engine beneath its long, rather lovely-looking bonnet that's been lifted straight out of an AMG C63S, but with sounds and a throttle map by Aston Martin to make it feel, well, more like an Aston Martin. Its chassis has been heavily tweaked to take maximum advantage of the fact that it weighs some 115 kilograms less than the DB11 V12. Plus, there's a range of styling and quality tweaks inside and out that have most definitely improved the overall quality feel of the car compared with the first V12s, and all at a cost of over 10 grand less than the V12. So then, is the new V8 DB11 really as good as it looks and sounds?
On the move, the V8 DB11 really does feel quite different from the V12, and there are a whole bunch of reasons why. Obviously it's got a V8 engine in it, but Aston have tried really quite hard to make their V8 version of the AMG 4-litre sound different from the AMG version, and they've done a pretty good job because it has a much harder edge to the exhaust note. It doesn't sound just as fluffy as it does in an AMG. Sounds more Aston Martin basically, but I mean the mid-range torque it's got, it's pretty rude, it really is. 4,000 revs, even as low as like 2,500 revs, it absolutely pulls. It keeps going all the way up to the top as well. Okay, the V12 has got 600 horsepower, this one's got quote unquote only 503 bhp, but when you put the torque to weight figure down on paper, it's actually better in the V8, and I think that's why the V8 feels just that much sharper, that much more alert than the V12. It's basically allowed Aston Martin to come up with a just about perfect 49-51 weight distribution, whereas it's the other way around in the V12. And there's some suspension tweaks as well, which has stiffened up the back, and you can definitely feel that on the move. This thing feels sharper, a bit lighter on its feet. The steering itself is a little bit heavier than in the V12, and that will eventually come round to the V12 as well. You just add all that up and it makes the V8 feel quite a lot sharper, full stop, than the V12.
As in the V12, the DB11 V8's drivetrain and chassis can be individually tuned through 3 different modes: GT, Sport and Sport Plus. In each mode the steering remains the same, but the throttle and transmission maps get sharper, the dampers get stiffer, the exhaust note changes, and even the ESP map becomes fruitier. Or you can turn the whole lot off and do this kind of thing to your heart's content. 0 to 60 in the DB11 V8 takes 4 seconds dead, and the top speed is 187 miles an hour. In any of its drive modes though, the V8 DB11, as you can see, is a bit of a peach to drive.
Aston have also shortened the throws of the paddle shifters by 50%, so it's 50% less movement than you needed in the V12. That was mostly due to customer feedback with the V12, but also media feedback, and they are much better. They feel really nice and snappy and crisp. Massive improvement. But I think the biggest improvement of all with the V8 over the V12 is simply the way it goes down the road and it goes around corners, especially the steering, which has got this more meat in it. I mean, you can properly chuck this thing about. I mean, it still feels like quite a big old wagon. What they've done with the back end particularly has had a big effect on the feel of the front end of the car. The way the brakes work, the pedal feel is just that much better. They were quite jumpy in the V12, the last V12 that I drove, but this thing's got lovely brake feel. You just feel like this thing is absolutely on your side. Oh yes. Oh yes. There's one thing I'm not so sure about, and this applies to the V12 just as much as it does to the V8. And that are these big, thick A-pillars that you've got here. This is a left-hand drive car, and there's a lot of twisty roads on this route, and I'm really struggling to see clearly around left-hand corners because of this huge, great big thick A-pillar. And that's not a problem only of the V8, it's, as I say, it's on the V12 as well. It's the car's fundamental architecture. I'm not so sure about that. The more time I've spent with this car, the more I have got to like it. This gearbox works really well. This car works really well. And I think that I should probably calm down a bit now. Otherwise, something naughty might happen. Yeah. Aston Martin DB11 V8. Good going on, great car.
Click on the video windows to watch a first drive of the Aston Martin GT8 or a test drive of the original DB11 V12 prototype. Click on the play icon to watch our latest video or on our logo to subscribe.